Hey guys, welcome back to the Serial at Midnight podcast. My name is Heath Holland, and I want to introduce you to my guest for this episode. I'm talking with Dustin Morrow, who is one half of the podcasting team behind the Long Rewind podcast. They look at 80s movies. Every single episode, they're looking at 80s movies, but not necessarily in the way that you might think. It's not one of those shows that goes, hey, remember Terminator? Terminator was great. Remember when Arnold said, I'll be back? That's not really what they're doing. They're analyzing trends, why these movies came at the time that they did, what was going on in the lives of the creators who brought them to life, and what some of these movies mean in the larger scope of not only our film fandom, but in culture at large. And you would expect nothing less from Dustin Morrow because he is a Emmy winner. He's a filmmaker. He's an author. He's written a book about acting with Kathleen Turner, and he's also written a textbook about filmmaking that he's currently revising. We're going to hear more about that in the course of this discussion. He's also a professor currently teaching in Portland. And so when I have access to someone that not only understands film and is deeply rooted in film, but is also teaching film to the next generation, I've got a lot of questions about that. And that's sort of a recurring theme here on the channel is what is the next generation or the generation after them? What is their relationship with film as an art form, film, cinema as a medium that encompasses so much. There's no other medium like cinema. So when I get to talk to someone that teaches this stuff, he's taught courses on all the greats. John Carpenter, he's taught courses on Woody Allen, he's taught courses on even getting into the nuts and bolts about how to edit, how to use music videos as a format for narrative, that sort of a thing. So I'm just setting up. This is what we're going to be getting into over the next hour or so. And I just had a blast talking to Dustin. And I think you're going to have a blast listening to this too, because you are here at Serial at Midnight because you want different kinds of discussions. You want something that you're probably not getting in a lot of other places. And that's the conversations we continue to have here at Serial at Midnight. And it was just a thrill to speak with Dustin. So without further ado, Dustin Morrow, one half of the Long Rewind podcast. You teach film, you make film, television as well, podcasts, the Long Rewind, and you've got a long form. Hang on, I'll get your whole list of credits right here. You've got the narrative podcast series Short of Breath. You gave a TED Talk in 2013. Where does this passion come from? Where does this I would say it's consuming, right? Before we hit record, I was like, you're on sabbatical, and you're like, yeah, I've made two features in the sabbatical. Where does this come from?
Just a deep love of filmmaking, and that originated when I was a kid. I did not go through that period of time that most young people go through where they try to figure out what they're going to do with their lives, because I kind of figured it out when I was about 10. And I just never wanted to do anything else but make movies. When I went to college, I kind of fell in love with the world of academia and scholarship and the college experience. I just like being on a college campus. I was like, oh, I love this. I never want to leave this. And so I figured out a way to kind of combine my two loves, which are higher education and filmmaking, into a career in which I can work as a professor, but also as a media maker. But my love of film began when I was a kid, and that began with the introduction of a VCR into my childhood home. My dad brought home a VCR in 1983, and it was one of those, the size of a Buick, sat up on top of your TV. It was a top loader. I don't know if you remember those. But yeah, that was, I started taping movies off of television and rewatching them over and over again, and to the point where like videotapes would disintegrate and I wouldn't be able to watch them anymore because they would literally turn to dust. I would play them so many times. I became an expert at repairing VHS tapes. I kind of think unless it is dust, there's no way I can't fix it. And
so, what do you think about all this? Are you aware of the nostalgia for VHS these days?
Yeah. I know that there are collectors. I suspect that they want to see the actual analog object in their hands and on their shelves than that they do want to see it on their television. At least that's where I am. I have a few VHS still that I sort of display on a bookcase, but just for fun in my office. But I'm not going to play them anytime soon.
Right.
They don't look very good. It's funny. There's a theater here in Portland where I live that is kind of like an Alamo Draft House. It does really innovative, interesting kind of community oriented programming and participatory programming. And one of the things they do is they do this B movie bingo night, and they show the movies on the big screen. And they have a massive. It's a historical theater that goes back to I think the 19 teens. They have this massive screen, but they show the movies on VHS, and they actually roll the cart with the VCR out onto the stage in front of the screen, and then you see them put the tape in, and then it's like, it's tracking, and it's got glitches all over the place, and we sit there and watch it, and we love it. It's kind of a fun experience. So
Yeah.
there's a place somewhere for VHS still.
We actually had a Betamax player before we had a
Oh
VHS,
wow, yeah,
which was we were one of those families that adopted Beta, and then of course it didn't go anywhere, and we had to
yeah,
start over with VHS. But
yeah. I
the I
remember my dad was a pharmacist, and I grew up in a small town, and he was the first store that rented videotapes, and they rented both beta and VHS. And we had the machines too that we would rent out. And I don't know if you ever saw that. Maybe I don't know, you look a little younger than I am, but maybe you remember this. When you would
I'm in my mid 40s.
Okay, I'm almost 50. So the tape machines that you would rent would were like suitcases. They were like these big plastic machines complete with a handle on them, like a suitcase. And yeah, we had the beta machine and the VCR, and you could rent those for the night. And they were so heavy and so huge. I'm amazed that anyone ever bothered, but it was a novelty.
Well, it was the novelty because it brought the movies into your house in a way that had never really been done before. Now, of course, there were the CEDs and the, those disc format, the large format things, but there was a level of access. I remember like we had there was a store in the mall that had, it was that's they sold televisions, and then there was a room in the back, and it was the tapes. And you'd go back there and it was just like, oh, there's the Wrath of Khan and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And do you think that I mean, surely having access to all those things because of your dad and those tapes being around was just like nonstop. You're feeding that passion, from a very young age. It was there. It was everywhere, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Those the tapes that he had at his store, where I watched so many times that they're like a part of me. They're ingrained. And some of them were terrible. And I have like incredible fondness for them, affection for them.
Hmm.
It was about 100 movies. It was a system where this is probably not that interesting, but there was a system for stores back in the day where you had vendors that would bring in tapes, and they would take out the tapes that weren't renting, and it was sort of like the store rented the tapes as well instead of purchased them. This
Hmm.
is pre-video stores even, so we're talking like very early 80s. And that's the system that my dad's store had. This guy would come in like every 2 weeks with a big box of tapes, and he would see what was renting and what wasn't, and he would swap them out. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it's the same way that worked with like paperback books, cassette tapes that they would sell, magazines. It was a very similar system. But there was a group of tapes that my wife laughs at me. She co-hosts the podcast with me, and I mention this all the time on our podcast. I call it the OG 100 because it was this sort of set of original 100 tapes that never left. And I don't know why the guy never took those, but the original group he brought always stayed there. And so those were the movies that became very important to me. And some of them are very like, nobody's ever heard of them.
Well, like what?
Oh, Max Dugan Returns was a movie that I really loved as a kid. Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard of it. I don't know if I can remember what it is though.
Yeah, it's a wonderful Neil Simon comedy with Marsha Mason, who was his wife at the time, and it's Matthew Broderick's first movie. He plays her son, and um, she's a school teacher. They're mired in poverty, basically in Venice, California. And then one night, her dad, who's played by Jason Robards, shows up in the middle of the night with a suitcase full of millions of dollars and tells them that he is dying and that it is his dying wish to change their lives. And she doesn't want him to because he's a criminal and she suspects this money is stolen. And that proves to be correct. But he basically buys them like a new car and a new house, and he redecorates their place, and he brings in all these electronics, and he gets them a dog. And it's like a kid's dream to have this like mystery relative come out of nowhere and then shower you with riches and affection. And it's just a very, very funny and very charming movie. Donald Sutherland is in it. Kiefer Sutherland is in it. Yeah, I highly recommend it. That one actually holds up.
It's interesting though that as a kid, this is you're talking about Neil Simon stuff when you're just a kid. That's not something that I think. The reason I wanted to go down this avenue is because I observed that for people who are high achievers in the area of film, there's a moment or there's a path. There's like uh, a presence of cinema in their lives far beyond what it is in other people's lives. They connected to it on a visceral level, on a subconscious level, as something that just really fits for them. And I know that you're that way. And I wanted to find out, if there was a moment or if there was like a switch that flipped. And of course, you grew up with all this stuff around you and you were steeped in cinema. You probably don't remember a time without cinema.
Yeah, not really. I mean, I started begging my parents for a video camera when I was about 10. Um, and I probably got it. They got me one when I was about 14 and started making movies. It was one of those really heavy. Do you remember those ones that go on your shoulder? They were like 9 pounds, the
Yeah.
VHS recorder. Yeah.
Those were expensive.
Yes, they were. And yeah, that's how, I mean, movies were sort of all I talked about. And, even as a kid, I was begging the video stores for their posters and their cardboard standees and putting those up in my bedroom.
Wow.
And I wish I still had a lot of that stuff. I
Yeah.
actually do still have a lot of the posters, but all the cardboard things are gone. But that was decor in my room.
Right.
And what I was starting to say about the VCR, the thing that the reason that device was so important to me was not just that you could watch things over and over again, but I started to realize as I would rewind something and play it over and then rewind it and play it again, that there was like a strategy for how these things were being made, it was my first sort of awakening to the idea that there were people behind this, behind the people on the screen, and that somebody had to be making these things. And I started to figure out sort of the language of editing and strategies of cinematography and art direction and film acting and stuff like that before I ever had a chance to sort of read about it in any kind of intellectual forum.
Was that encouraged? Did you have any support group? Were you getting support from your parents or from friend? No. Hmm.
No, I mean, I grew up in a town of 1,000 people in the rural downstate Illinois, middle of nowhere. And so there was nobody in my town, let alone my school that was really into movies.
What about your
Um,
parents? Did they, I
no,
mean,
they
I'm
both
sorry
work
to
in
hear.
medicine. My mom was a
Okay.
nurse and my dad was a pharmacist, and they were like, I don't know. We went to the movies a lot just because there wasn't a lot else to do
Well, that was
where
popular
I
entertainment back
grew
then.
up. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it was, we went to the movies a ton. They took me to a ton of movies, and I'm sure part of that love was developed just by going to the theater every weekend to see what was out. But yeah, I started reading about it. But do you remember Premiere Magazine?
Of course.
Yeah, so I was a subscriber to that from the very first issue, and I saved them all and reread them, and I tore out the ads and hung them on the wall, and I was into that magazine. And then Entertainment Weekly came along in the early '90s and started getting that too. And
Hmm.
I used to watch the shows that play what I now know are just basically EPKs and promotional pieces. But at the time, when you're a kid, you don't know any better. So stuff like Entertainment Tonight, I would watch that every night.
Leonard Maltin was like a
Leonard
saint.
Maltin, yeah,
Yeah.
his big fat film guide. Yeah, I would go through that book and check off what I had seen, rite of passage stuff for any
Right.
kind of
Have you
budding
had a
film
chance
nerd.
to interact with Leonard Maltin at this point?
No, I've never met him. I would love to meet him. I mean, I'm sure he knows. I've heard enough interviews with him to know that he knows what those books meant to us kids in the
Yeah.
80s who were really into film. I mean, it was pre-internet, so his books were as close as you could get to some kind of database or directory to everything that had kind of ever been made.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was very, you know the history of Leonard Maltin, but like when he was younger, when he was college age, he was making, he was writing these fanzines and going like basically calling people up on the phone and interviewing them, calling filmmakers and actors on the phone as a young person, and then that evolves into those massive books that were. I remember when I bought my first one, and I was like, I have this. Yeah, I didn't have to check it out from the library. I was like, this is mine now. It's like an encyclopedia of cinema. But I was just wondering, like, because you make films, and has he seen your films, and what does he think about your films, and have you had a chance to talk to him about it? But maybe one day, he's still active in the festival circuit and all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't think he's doing any kind of reviewing or anything anymore. I know he hosts a podcast with his daughter.
Right.
Um, but yeah, he's got to be getting up there. I would imagine he's got to
He's
be.
got some health issues too. I
Does he?
submitted for an
Okay.
interview with him. I know several people that know him, and I asked if he would talk to me, and he said, I'm not up for it. I don't have
Yeah.
the stamina for it." And I was like, "Well, I can't argue with that." And I'm sure so many people want something from him, that because he's such an icon in the that sphere. Well, I don't necessarily want to go chronologically through your entire career, but I do. It is interesting to me that the cinema of your the cinema experiences of your youth kind of fuel this whole thing. I'm always interested in where the passion comes from. And some people just seem like they're born with it. Some people have like this road to Damascus moment where they're like, "Oh, movies." And then other people, they're just born that way. I talked to a guy about a month ago, and he was, for fun as a kid, he would edit deleted scenes back into movies with VHS just for fun. And I'm like, okay, you're born, right? Like that's not
Yeah.
something that. So,
Well, I do think part of it depends on your experience of film as a young person. Um, and for me, in part, if I had grown up in like Manhattan, I don't know that my relationship to and love of movies would be the same as it is growing up in a small town in a farming community in downstate Illinois. Because I had a great childhood. I grew up on a lake. There was a lake right behind my house. And so I was always in the lake. I had a lot of fun. But I mean, there was 40 people in my class. So it was a very small school. I didn't know a lot of people. This was pre-internet. So my access to news and interest in cultures around the world was limited necessarily by the technology. And so my window into other experiences, other places, other times all came through cinema. And when the VCR came along and video stores followed shortly after, that was like a lot of kids. I had my first experience of having some kind of control over what I was watching, being able to go to the store and browse the shelves and find a movie on the shelf that looked interesting and rent it with my own allowance money and bring it home and watch it was just, it's a very, that's a formative experience, I think, for any kid. And so, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this other than to say, like, it was the movies in some ways taught me about empathy, about what it's like to walk in other people's shoes, and
yes.
it made the world that was very small for me because of where I lived much bigger and more interesting, and it made me excited about growing up and about the future and about contributing myself to this history of media making that hopefully will provide stories for people that weren't being told otherwise through my own work.
That's beautiful. And that's exactly what film can do is because I grew up in a small town in the deep South, and I had a very similar experience. I didn't know anybody that owned the video store, but movies were an escape for me out of that life. And I was an only child, and I was lonely a lot of the time. And the
Hmm.
movies became my friends, and the people in the movies became my friends. And those stories taught me empathy. It does teach you a life outside of yourself. It helps you to step outside of yourself and to see a bigger picture. And I said something to that effect recently on social media, which I know it's social media. And a lot of people were like, yes, movies teach empathy, but some people kind of pushed back on it. I'm curious, as a professor, what you see in your students when they come to these classes. Do you get a gauge on what the role of movies is in the current, just really in our current pop culture? Because there's so much other, I mean, they got TikTok, right? They've got YouTube, they've got podcasts. There's so many other things competing for their attention. Do movies still teach empathy? Are they still there to see it?
Oh, oh, Heath.
Next question. Okay. No.
Yeah, don't get me started.
Well, but I'm going to
I'll
give
give
you
you the
more time.
capsule answer to that, which
Okay.
is that there's a I can't remember who does it. There's a poll that's done every year of students at the major film schools. So not ones like mine, but like NYU, USC, UCLA, Columbia, where they ask the students what they want to do when they graduate, like what their greatest ambition is. And for like decades, it was to be a film director. And then sometime like 7, 8 years ago, it changed for the first time to content creator, and
Yep.
it's never gone back.
Right.
And obviously, I have very mixed feelings about that. I don't teach in a school of content creation. I teach in a school of film, but we're offering more classes that integrate new media. You know, I wrote a textbook
Mhm.
about that in part explores the integration of emerging media into traditional production strategies. So I understand that like it's something I need to know and something I need to teach. But I can tell you just from chatting with them that my students generally, and there are always exceptions. There's always like the one nerd that I'm like, you don't belong in this decade. Um, but generally, by and large, they're just not. The students who are studying movies these days are just not that into movies, which is very strange to me. Like I'm always amazed at what they haven't seen, which is almost everything pre like 19 mid 90s maybe is about as
Okay.
old as they get.
See, I talked to another film professor, and he told me that his students are not watching movies before the year 2000. And this was a couple of years ago. Now my wife is she's in education. I've got a daughter in college, and I see the trends, and I've seen the thing that you mentioned, which is that content creator. What do you want to be when you grow up? Now it's I want to be a TikToker that makes, millions of dollars off of TikTok videos. But the reason I wanted to get your opinion on that is because I will speak sometimes from my perspective, which is that film is not something that most younger people are particularly invested in or literate in. And just yesterday, someone said the way you talk about young people is really unfair. And I'm like, is it? I mean, I feel like this is kind of a fact. So I wanted your personal perspective on that as somebody that's teaching these classes and having communication with the students. And you've just corroborated what I thought was the case.
Yeah, it's only unfair in the sense that you and I aren't meeting them where they are. I mean, we're trying to impose our own love of cinema on them and believe that they should love it as much as we do. I mean, this is the Ted Sarandos approach, right? Like he just within, I don't know when this you're going to drop this episode, but in the last couple of weeks, I think it was just last week, he made the news for saying something to the effect that nobody cares about the theatrical experience anymore, and so that's why Netflix does not, unless they're forced to by the filmmaker that they're working with, doesn't do theatrical releases for their original movies. And he's not wrong. I mean, there are exceptions like Maverick, right, that break out, but by and large, like the film going experience has changed. I mean, we all have great TVs and great sound systems in our living rooms now. And so you don't need that. You don't need that big screen experience to replicate some of that experience. What you miss is the communal experience of film going, right? Seeing it with other people. That's something you can't replicate in your living room. But the technical experience, you kind of can now. And so, there's been a lot of hand wringing and discussion among people that work in the film industry in the years since COVID about the shrinking of the industry, how fewer films are being made, how there's less opportunity. Um, and I think we're at an interesting we're at an interesting point where the industry is going to have to look inward and make some hard choices, I think, and decide what their what hills they're willing to die on.
Yeah. I'm still active at the movies. I still go to the movies multiple times a week. I support both my multiplex and my local art house cinema.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And I make videos. I don't really do it anymore because I've kind of burned myself out on it. But I would go, hey guys, look at this amazing, I would review movies here. And this is this I loved last year to 2024. I had a great year at the movies. There were so many risks. I mean, you got Francis Ford Coppola taking risks. You've got Kevin
Mm-hmm.
Costner taking risks. You've got smaller projects. Um, and I would come to my channel and talk about it. And it was almost like the audience gets offended. They're like, why would I go see a movie at the theater when I can watch it at home? And and you go, well, because when you see it with the theater, it's a shared experience, and there's a magic that happens when you're in a dark room with strangers. But now more and more, I do get it. The strangers are on their phone.
Yeah.
The last my wife and I went to go see Sinners, and it was pretty much sold out. And I was
Mm-hmm.
amazed at the number of phones that were out and on the whole movie. Not for
Yeah.
like 5 minutes, like people just like scrolling for the whole movie. And so
Yeah.
I don't know what we do about that. You're right. The culture has changed to the point that there's got to be some sort
Yeah.
of an awakening I mean, I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, I think for us individually as moviegoers, one thing we can do is support the right theaters. I'm glad to hear you say that you're going to art house theaters as well as multiplexes. The theater I mentioned earlier, the Hollywood Theater, is a nonprofit theater, and it does really innovative. They show first run movies, and I assume that's where they make their bread and butter, but they also do just really innovative repertory programming, really interesting participatory programming. They support a lot of local film festivals. They have collaborated with me and my school on screenings, and I've noticed going there that the audiences there are far more respectful, and I suspect that you have to find the right theater, and that just going to the multiplex at the mall is maybe going to give you
Yes.
the phone crowd, the crowd that talks incessantly through the whole movie. But like the art house theater, I assume maybe that your experience is better there,
It is
because
a
those are
little
more
better.
serious cinephiles.
It's
I
right.
would expect.
That is true. It's still not great, There's still I went to go see the Umbrellas of Schomburg at
Mm-hmm.
theater, and this guy was like 4 or 5 seats over, just talking to the screen,
Hmm.
and
So do
things
you
would
think
happen.
that's because of what we were just saying about the how our living rooms now more and more resemble theaters?
Maybe.
Do you think that's because people are bringing those, that their brain can't make the switch between like, I'm not in my living room anymore. Like I can't
Yeah.
just bust out my phone or start talking to my
I think,
partner.
yeah, I think that and I think the shift probably happened. I noticed it particularly after COVID, after the pandemic, and the staying at home. When people came back, the behaviors had changed. And as an educator as well, that the impact on students and on there was development that was lost
Oh
because of
yeah.
what
Yeah.
happened. And I don't, we haven't adjusted for that. And I don't
Yeah.
know now if this is just the new normal. I think this is just the new normal.
Yeah, I hope not, but you're probably right. I mean,
Well, as
yeah.
a filmmaker, do you care how people watch your movies? Do you want them to see it in a theater environment, or are you happy? Are you aware that people are probably watching them on their phones?
Yeah, I don't love that, but yeah, I mean, ideally I would love people to see my work in a theater with a crowd. I mean, most of my stuff is very small, and so the theatrical exhibition that it gets is usually in film festivals, and film festivals draw pretty respectful crowds.
Right.
And so and pretty like enthusiastic, if sometimes judgmental crowds. And so those experiences are usually pretty positive. But yeah, I mean, when I'm doing something in post, like I just finished a film, like I'll bring it down and watch it on the TV in my living room. I'll watch it on my phone. I'll watch it on my iPad. I'll look at it on a laptop and look at and listen to it, um, because I want it to play in all of those venues in which people are going to watch it. It's sort of like, I don't know, you probably heard stories about bands that would like mix their mix their records in a studio and then they would like bring it out and play it in the car while they drove around. All right. I think there's a scene in the movie once actually where they do that. Just because you want to make sure like it's going to sound good in the car where people are going to listen to it. So
Right.
it's a similar thing.
Once is an inspiration for you, right? That's something that made an impact on you, didn't it?
Oh yeah, hugely. I always loved musicals, and when I saw that film, I was like, "Oh, you can do a musical with no budget." I didn't realize this was possible. And the way that John Carney did it was by setting all the music in the world of the film. So in other words, making it all diegetic music, not having characters just break out into song and start dancing down the sidewalk. And I had always kind of wanted to make a musical, but assumed that budget wise, and also just, because there wasn't much of an appetite for it from the public, that that was not going to be a possibility. And when I saw the movie, I was like, oh, I could make a musical. And so I started thinking even beyond what he did, which is thinking about all the different ways that people listen to music. And just started like making a list everywhere I went of where I was hearing kind of background music, everything from like the grocery store to, I mean, I don't know, like when you're waiting on a phone to talk to somebody and they put you on hold. Just every place I was sort of being subjected to music that I wasn't asking to listen to. And using that list, I made a film called Everything Went Down, which was a musical. And I put all of those ways that we hear music in everyday life are in that movie, and those are the musical numbers. So it's just an interesting kind of almost a formalist approach to contemporary musicals. But yeah, it was fun.
Well, and I know music is something that I see a lot in your work, in your writing, in your teaching. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna read all of these right now, but music video. These are classes that you've taught at some point.
Yeah,
Music
I taught a music
video
video
practice.
class. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, there's another one here too. There's several that are music related. Anyway, what do you see film and music as parallel art forms that can intersect at various points? I mean, where's your I don't know what the word I'm looking for. What's your stance on that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, Yeah, I was on the board of directors when I lived in Philadelphia of an organization that promoted music therapy. And so we did things like uh like songwriting programs for kids with cancer, or composition exercises for, people dealing with, recovery from burns, just things like that. And there's a lot of hard science out there about that show that people that engage with the arts heal faster from literal physical, physiological injuries and conditions than those that don't. So there's real value in it. That was the other reason I wanted to make that movie that I was just talking about, because that's a story about a guy who basically is healed psychologically through his engagement with a very specific artist's music. I'm also a big believer in art as biography. And that's part of what our podcast is, The Long Rewind. It's looking at our life stories through the art that we choose to love and consume. And certainly that has been explored by other artists in terms of music. High Fidelity is largely about that, right? I think in fact, there's even a scene where in that movie where Todd Luizzo's character is at John Cusack's apartment, and John Cusack is reorganizing his record collection, and he says, "What are you doing? Alphabetical?" He's like, "No," and he's like, "By artist?" He's like, "No," and he's biographically. And I always love that scene. I would love to do that with my movie collection someday.
Well, and then there's the art of the mixtape too, where that's a
Yeah.
biographical art as
Oh, for
well.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that, obviously, to get back to your original question, I think they have a lot in common. I think that I've done a lot of reading. I'm by no means an expert on it, but I find very interesting the neurological interaction with film. And I did a little bit of research on that with music too, just about what parts of the brain are activated by listening to music. Like, why is it that someone with advanced Alzheimer's can't remember, you know, really important stuff, but they can remember like a song they heard, every word of a song they heard 50 years ago that they haven't heard since. That stuff's really fascinating to me. When I do my teach my editing class, I do a pretty deep dive into why the brain understands editing, because it should be completely, the nature of editing is completely at odds with the way we live in reality. I mean, it is literally the exact opposite, because it is discontinuous. There's, you could skip parts, you can move around, like there's stuff omitted. We shouldn't be able to understand it, but not only can we understand it, but we understand it almost intuitively. Nobody has to sit down and teach us when we're 5 what editing is. We just start watching Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, and we get it. We pick it up. It's like learning a language as a kid. I just find this stuff very fascinating. I think it's someplace we should be doing more work from a research point of view, because I think we're not using music and film and the arts to their fullest potential in terms of helping people.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Sidebar, because Sesame Street's been in the news lately, I've gone back and I've started watching some of the early, like the first season episodes. Some of them are
Oh,
streaming on Max, but it's so incredible is in terms of the filmmaking that's gone into it, the artistry and the craft that's gone into it, you know. I think that detractors might want to say, well, it's just puppets and they're whatever. But I mean, the animation, it's, the mix of music, the mix of animation. Uh, and there's a great documentary about the series as well, where they talk about really using the techniques that were used for advertising to teach kids, colors and numbers and shapes and all that stuff.
yeah.
And it does, like, I remember songs from Sesame Street that I heard 42 years ago that have just stuck with me because of that intersection of sound and vision, I suppose.
Yeah. And have you noticed when watching those episodes that you've looked at recently how slow they are and how sort of nurturing they are in their patience to deliver you images and sound? The reason I ask is that it seems like it couldn't be more obvious that putting tiny little kids whose brains are basically made of clay on a device like an iPad and letting them flip through TikTok. It's hard
Or
to
even
believe.
Instagram, where you're
Yeah, or
just click,
Instagram.
click,
It's hard
click,
to believe
click.
it couldn't. I can't believe that people don't recognize how damaging that must be.
Yeah.
And looking at that old media as an example of how to do it right, um,
Hmm.
we should be doing more of that, perhaps.
I agree. And I know we probably come off to the younger generation as old men yelling at clouds, but I mean, I think there is something to slower, quieter, more deliberately paced, letting you think about something. Kids don't have an opportunity to be bored now. They're never alone with their thoughts, you know.
Yeah.
There's something competing for their attention all the time.
Well,
And
I'm just now getting. I mean, I get 18 through 22-year olds. Like that's my average age of a student that I see, and I'm just now getting the ones that have never known a world without any of that kind of slow media that I would call it. And I can see it, man. I can see their struggle to focus, to just to pay attention. I'm amazed at how many of them have never read a book by choice, or how many of them have never read a book, period.
yeah.
Um, and they like if I screen something in class, I see people scrolling their phones like they just it's instinctual for
Mhm.
them. It's like they feel nervous. It's like a comfort blanket or something.
Right. Yes. My daughter told me one time. My daughter's in college now, but she told me one time, this helps me scrolling on my phone while I'm watching a movie, quote, watching. She's
Mm-hmm.
listening to the movie is what she's doing. Helps me to focus. It helps me to pay attention. And I'm like, no, I don't. It may make you feel more comfort, but it's not helping you to pay attention to the movie. But what are you going to do? You're going to argue with them. When you teach
Yeah.
these editing classes,
Well, here's my question that I would ask her. It's sort of like, is is the input of the movie, like the intake, is it is it not enough? And is that why you feel anxious? Like, I wonder if what she means by comfort is that there's an anxiety that's for somebody who grew up their whole life taking in way more media all the time than we ever did. Is there an anxiety when you slow it down, when you give them just one input, which is like a film? I mean, that's why they can't resist pulling their phones out at the movie theater, right? I mean, if ever there was a place where you should have just one, be taking in one piece of media at a time, it's in a movie theater. You should just be watching the movie,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But it's too anxiety provoking for them, I think, and so they reach for, it's like a fidget spinner, right? That
Yes.
phone, yeah, they just
Yeah.
they reach for it, and it's just I get it, but it's sort of, it's a little scary.
It is scary. I wonder if they feel that because of course we know a time, I didn't have my first cell phone until I think I was in college. Um, so I'm from a time when you could get lost, you could go off the grid for a little while and nobody knew where you were, and that was okay, and it was
Oh
kind of
yeah,
fun. And yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the Gen X experience, right? That was, I mean, that always blows their minds that, we would you would get up and you would watch cartoons, eat your cereal, and then you were expected to get out of the house until dinner. And you knew when the lights came on, the street lights, or by a certain time that you had to be home for dinner. But other than that, like, our parents had no idea what we were off doing.
Right.
I mean, I grew up in the country, and the things that I would run around doing would give my parents nightmares. I mean, I probably almost died, you know, on a monthly basis. like the things I did with my bike, or the stuff I did in the lake. But and they had no idea. And I don't know. It was just a different era, all that independence and
So
you
when
know.
you teach these editing courses, do you see, I know you're getting into the form of it and the narrative structure of editing, but is there discussion about hypercutting, like a
Hmm.
a Zack Snyder movie or whatever, where they'll have you seen these things on the internet where they'll put in a sound effect every time there's a cut to draw your attention to the cut?
Hmm.
So it's like,
Hmm.
it's like every 1 to 2 seconds for a lot of these movies.
Hmm.
Do you have any comment on that or any
Yeah, one
observations?
of the first exercises I do in my editing class, because it's an invisible art. If it's done correctly, you shouldn't notice it. So it's a hard thing to study. It's not like cinematography or acting or anything else where, it naturally kind of brings attention to itself. And so one of the first things I do in that class is I just run a clip from something they've seen a million times, and I tell them all to clap in synchronicity uh, every time they see a cut. And it's easy to do when you're watching an older movie, but when you put on The Matrix or, something from The Fast and the Furious or whatever, then you're essentially clapping nonstop. It sounds like applause in the classroom. And they can't do it in sync. That's the other thing. I'm like, try and keep your claps in sync. And they can't because the cuts are just coming too fast. In editing theory, there's a thing called the ASL, which is the average shot length, which is something that has been studied over time. And it's down to like 2 seconds or something like that in the most recent survey of modern films. And it used to be like 14 back in the like Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire days. It's dropped steadily.
Yeah,
And
and if you watch it,
frankly, our generation is largely responsible for that because MTV was hugely influential on how films were cut. And so,
yeah, to be
that's,
clear, our generation is the one making those movies that are doing that. So,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. When you go back and watch a pre-code, I was watching an old Clara Bow movie the other night, and there's just no cuts at all. It's like a
yeah,
whole scene for 3.5 minutes
yeah. Just
or
a
something
big
like that.
master shot. Yeah,
Yeah, stage play basically.
yeah, yeah. Well, I always show them like, I'll show them a scene from An American in Paris where Gene Kelly goes into a cabaret and does a dance. And then I'll show them a scene from Moulin Rouge that basically shows the exact same action. Ewan McGregor goes into a cabaret, does a little dancing, and the the scenes couldn't look less alike. And then I ask my students which one they like better, and I'm always a little surprised. I mean, there are some of them that are like the American in Paris. It looks really boring, but most of them actually prefer An American in Paris. And the reason that I hear most often for that is that you can actually see what he's doing. You can see his dancing. They're not The cutting is not creating the energy of the dance. Gene Kelly's creating the energy of the dance. And it's just an interesting exercise in questioning what is valuable within your frame and how you choose to share it with your audience.
That's such a good insight. How did you get connected with Kathleen Turner?
She was my favorite actress growing up. Just always really loved her. Thought she was really interesting. I'm a big fan of *Romancing the Stone*, and that character, Joan Wilder, kind of meant a lot to me as somebody who struggled with confidence when I was young. And that movie was about this mousy person being forced into a situation that she didn't ask for, and having to draw on reserves and some resilience and develop her confidence. And she's a very different person at the end of that movie than she is at the beginning. And I always found that just kind of inspiring. And on top of the fact that that movie is just a lot of fun. And so I just followed her career my whole life. I just found her choices as an actor to be very interesting, not just in the performances, but the choices she made from a career perspective. She could have had a very different career than she did if she had been willing to take the movies that her agents and managers wanted her to take. But she was very much interested in acting as a craft and not as a road to stardom and fame and riches. And so she would always do sort of the opposite thing next after any role. So, for example, she does Body Heat first, where she's labeled this like sexy femme fatale, and she gets offered every kind of like Sharon Stone esque erotic thriller that Hollywood was making for like years, and turns them all down. And for her next part, she does The Man with Two Brains with Steve Martin, where she basically lampoons that image. And then they told her, like, well, you'll just always be the sex pot and the femme fatale and the bombshell. And so she does Romancing the Stone, where she plays this kind of mousy woman with no, who doesn't wear makeup, and has no confidence. And they told her she would never be funny, that she was a serious actress. So she does a comedy after that. She does Peggy Sue Got Married. And then they said, now you're a big mainstream actress. You should only do, mainstream hits like Romancing the Stone. So her next movie was this like psychosexual art house film with Crimes of Passion with Ken Russell, who is a mad English filmmaker. So it's just decisions like that through her whole career, like going against what everybody wanted her to do, which I always thought was really fascinating, and weirdly heroic. And so I met her in Philadelphia when I was teaching there. She was doing a play at a big theater company there, and I met her at that theater and pitched her on the idea of doing a book, together, where we would kind of go through all of her theories on acting, which she claimed to not have, but I knew that she had done a lot of teaching. She taught at NYU. She teaches at Pace University now. They've actually made her a professor, I think. Um, I think it's Pace. I may be misstating that. Anyway, it's some school in New York. And so I knew that she had theories on acting, if she was teaching. And so I said, well, I'll help you find them, whatever they are. We'll
Do
just
you
go
think
through
she
your
didn't want to
career.
do that because she wanted to kind of keep him as her own curriculum, or do you think she just wasn't aware of it?
No, I think it's because the classes she was teaching at the time were called practical acting, shut up and do it. She has this she's very allergic to any kind of intellectualization of that art. She doesn't subscribe to, like, she's not method. She doesn't do Stanislavski. Like, she studied all that stuff in college, and she's like, bits and pieces of all of those schools of acting are helpful, but it's not helpful to just say, I'm a method actor. Like, that, to have somebody prescribe how you approach your art is not useful. You have to find your own method, and eventually it becomes the, like, whatever your personal, the Kathleen Turner method, she calls it. And so I said, well, that is a method, like, even though you don't think it is. And so, of course, we wrote this 400-page book together about all of kind of her theories on acting, and it became, on another level, a deep exploration of the relationship between the actor and the director, because I'm a director. And so that's the perspective that I brought on that discussion. Um, I know some people that are like big Kathleen Turner fans and just wanted to read, because she's obviously, if you know her at all, she's kind of a diva, and in the best sense, and very outspoken, and kind of a larger than life character, kind of an old school Hollywood. She's of that old vanguard of like Lauren Bacall, and like she's from the old school Hollywood movie star school. And I think a lot of people just wanted to read a book where she was making fun of people and saying acidly hilarious things. And those people were like, who is this guy that keeps talking through this whole book about his theories on directing? But so it's been interesting to see the reaction to that book, because the people that really love it are the people that are really into the arts, or like developing actors. Especially, I've heard from a lot of actors who are like, this is the best book I've read about acting as an art. Which is another way that I sold her on writing it, because there's just not a lot of good ones out there from people who have actually reached the height, the pinnacle of their field. There's a lot of books about, like, textbooks about acting, but they're written by people that have hardly done any acting. So, like, there's very few really good books about, like, I think Michael Caine might have one from like the 70s.
Al
Jenna,
Pacino just wrote a book too, and he gets into some of that, but
does
not
he?
really.
Yeah.
He just doesn't want the spotlight at all. That's what I learned about Al Pacino through reading his autobiography. Is like he likes he loves plays Movies, you know,
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
seems at odds with his success.
Kathleen's the same way. I mean, she's always been like, I've always been a stage actress who somehow ended up making movies and got famous from making movies, but she never went more than a year without doing a play. And she's never lived in Los Angeles. She's always been a New Yorker. And that's because she wants to be part of the theater
Hmm.
industry. That's where she considers herself to be a stage actor. And
Do
she
you
is. She's amazing on stage.
absolutely? Do you consider yourself to be an actor's director?
I mean, maybe more so after writing that book.
Yeah.
That was interesting to me because that experience of writing that book with her dictated or informed at least the films that I made afterwards. Because before I wrote that book, I thought that I did understand actors and I understood how to direct actors. I'd even taught courses on it. And then I read that book with her, and she opened my eyes to so many things that I had never thought about. And it made me really excited to do some actor centric projects.
Hmm.
So, like the podcast, the narrative podcast that you mentioned earlier, Short of Breath, came out of that. And my film Blackpool, which is essentially like three actors in a room going at each other, that came out of that book. Just wanting to work really intimately with actors on and being a partner in their performances. Part of that's editing too, right? Like I during the brief period that I worked in LA in the film industry, I was an editor, and I realized even then that any actor's performance is a partnership between that actor and somebody they'll never meet, which is who is the editor, the person who shapes the work that they gave them, the raw material they gave them. Like the actor gives you the clay, but you have to form the clay in post-production into something that is consistent and interesting and compelling.
Yeah. Would you talk to me a little bit about your time editing in Hollywood?
Yeah, I mean, I've done so much more interesting editing since then, but yeah, when I was there,
Talk
I
about
was,
all of it. That's
yeah,
I just want
yeah,
to get you talking. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in film school, it was my favorite part of the process, post-production and editing. And so when I went to Hollywood, I was like, I'm going to see what this is like as a career. I think I knew even then that I was like, I'm going to end up back in academia. Um, but I wanted to have the experience of working in the industry to inform my teaching, if nothing else. And so, um, that's what I did while I was there. And I cut mostly like trailers and music videos and like network promos and kind of in-house material for the studios, sales packages, some children's television, some sports television. Nothing really interesting.
Well,
Um,
I think trailer editing is particularly interesting, and I want to ask you about it because, I mean, what do you think about the current state of movie trailers where it's now there's this model of like a popular song and maybe the rising crescendo release, it's like four beats within a single trailer.
yeah,
What makes a good trailer for you? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean they are their own mini industry, right? And so like any industry, um, they're gonna have trends and they're gonna ebb and flow, and all the trailers in the 80s look the same. They just don't look like the trailers today.
Right.
So one trailer comes out with the that Inception sound, and everybody's got to. When I was cutting trailers, we would get notes asking for specific songs and sound effects and stuff. And it was always stuff that had been in other trailers. And so it was just like, oh, you just want this to look like Speed again. Okay, well, here's another trailer that looks exactly like Speed. There's not a lot of originality, but I get it. Like the trailers are commercials. They're trying to sell you something. Same thing in music videos. When I would cut a music video, it's like, make this music video look like these 12 music videos, but it's because they're trying to sell you an album. So I get it. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty rare that you see a trailer that's really interesting in its own right, right? You know, you have to read the trailer and detect almost like a detective whether it's the film that it's hiding is going to be something interesting or not.
Absolutely. Yeah,
But
and I hear
yeah,
from
I
a lot
mean,
of
I'm with
people
you.
that
If
are
I
like,
see one more trailer that has a whispery woman with a plaintive piano covering some 80s song,
right.
I'm going to lose my mind.
Don't you want me, baby?
Exactly. You
Plong.
spin me right round. I can't take it anymore. I can't take it. It's just I thought that was over actually, and then like a new flurry of them started, and I was like, oh, I guess we're not done with that yet.
Right. Yeah, people see the movies and they're like, the trailer was very different. You know,
Yeah,
they get hooked on the trailer and then it's not the
yeah.
movie that they see. And they're judging the movie based on the trailer. And that's problematic, but I don't know what you do about it.
Yeah, I will say this. They have incredible value to me as an educator because I use them in my editing class. I have a trailer editing exercise because if you're editing a trailer correctly, according to Hollywood, you are A, you're selling the movie. B, you're using the style of the time, like we've sort of been discussing. And C, you're telling the entire story of the film. They don't want you to leave out the ending. They don't want you to leave out the top moments from the movie. They want you to condense the entire movie into 2.5 minutes. And it has to be exactly 2.5 minutes. And so these are all parameters that I give my students. I give them like 30 films and I say, pick one you like, and then tell me the entire film in 2.5 minutes. And if they don't tell me the whole movie, all three acts, then I grade them down on it. It's a great exercise in narrative constriction and summary, and that's a big part of editing in general. So it's a great way to learn cutting, taking something long and making it the same thing only short.
But then yes, but then does that become sort of a substitute for the over? If you can do it in 2.5 minutes, what's the benefit of the full? I mean, I know, but how do you teach that? If you can teach it in two, if you can share that experience in 2.5 minutes, why sit through 90 minutes of an entire thing when you can get it in 2.5? It's that short attention span thing. You know what I mean?
Well, presumably in 2.5 minutes, it does nothing but entice you to want more of it. If it doesn't, then it's not doing its job. But there, I have seen. Well, I'm not sure I have. I'm trying to think of a I'm trying to think
Let's
of a
say you
trailer I've
have.
seen where I was like, "Wow, that trailer was emotionally affecting
Mhm.
in some way." Um, Boy, I don't know. There are a few, I
Well, I'll
suppose.
tell you what, the trailer for the new Superman movie emotionally affects me, but I think it's relying on the nostalgia that I have for the
Yeah,
original.
of course. You're bringing it does me too because I'm a big Superman fan, but you're bringing a lot of stuff to it. Yeah.
That theme song, the theme music, and
Yeah.
the slow motion imagery that it uses. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but hopefully like the idea is like, you know, you can see in that trailer that this is an experience that might emotionally affect me and I want more of it. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to go see the movie. But boy, if you can't get enticed by the trailer, then the odds that you're going to enjoy the movie are probably pretty slim. And so they do still have some value as like a test drive for a film, right? But
Do you outsource your trailers or do you do them yourself?
uh both. I mean, I must have lost my mojo because I cut a trailer for my last movie and then I gave it to my distributor and they didn't use it. They cut their own. Um, and
No thanks.
well, the trailer they cut was far more. It just looked like most trailers. So it's exactly what we were saying. I think I was trying to do something more interesting
Hmm.
as a filmmaker, which is
You were
maybe
the
like,
artiste,
yeah,
right?
exactly. It's
Yeah.
why maybe why as a filmmaker you shouldn't cut your own trailer.
They wanted Ooga Chaka, and they wanted the popular music in it.
Essentially, yeah, essentially that's what it was. Yeah. I mean, the movie, I think they misrepresented the movie a little by changing the trailer, but I understood why they did that. The only worry for me as a filmmaker is that people are going to expect something else when they go to watch the movie. The movie is kind of a thriller, but it's more of like a political melodrama in some ways, and they sold it like it was borderline horror, and it's definitely not that. And so I think anyone who would watch it hoping that it was that is going to be disappointed, and I just don't want people to be disappointed when they
Yeah.
watch it. So
Yeah. You know, horror fans too. If it's not horror, they're like, what is
yeah,
this?
what the hell is this? Yeah,
What what movie are you talking about?
Blackpool.
Okay. All right.
It's an Irish. It's
Mm-hmm.
about the conflict in Ireland, um, as told through the conflict between these two guys 30 years later who had this horrible incident that they shared in their childhood, and it so kind of destroyed both of their lives and put them on this sort of fated collision course with revenge and retribution, and they kind of come together in one night, and it gets violent and ugly. But it's not a horror movie for sure.
Right. Yeah, no, your movies are largely about people, and that brings us full circle to what we're talking about, empathy uh and culture and relationships and just the human condition. And we need more filmmakers that are telling those stories. And talk what's going on right now? Anything you want to promote or hint at, or and obviously we want to promote the website. I'm winding us down here, but
Mm-hmm.
promote the website because you've got exhaustive links and I mean everything is on the site. But like, what's going on right now?
Yeah, what have I? I'm busy.
You're making movies, yeah, and you're on
Yeah,
sabbatical,
yeah.
and you're going to be teaching again in the is summer or fall? Which did you say?
In the fall, yeah,
In the
yeah.
fall. Okay.
Yeah. So I have the podcast, The Long Rewind, which is it releases every Wednesday morning, and that's a deep dive into 1980s cinema, into
Can we
Gen
tease
X
people that I'm going to be a
cinema.
future guest on
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. Heath is going to be on there. We don't use the format that a lot of podcasts use where they kind of do a movie a week. We sort of we take a trend or a genre or something that was happening culturally that's reflected in the cinema, and we try to unpack it and turn it inside out and ask like why was this a thing in the 80s, leading to hopefully like a deeper understanding of not just the the cinema of that decade, but the culture and the history and the politics that everything that was happening in that time. It's really, but I know that makes it sound really dry, but it's actually a pretty fun podcast.
I think
I,
people that follow my channel are going to be interested in that. But
cool.
we
Thanks.
that's we're about the why and the what does this mean? That's
Yeah.
kind of my whole thing. I'm a seeker, right? I'm always searching and like trying to figure out why something is the way it is.
Hmm. And I have a feature film called Panic Sets In that is just finished post, and so that'll be probably coming out through film festivals and through screening channels soon. And then I have a movie that I wrote for the Lifetime Network that is going to premiere a little later this year. I don't know when yet. That's called The Little Girl in the Woods. It's kind of a survival thriller. Um,
It's a horror movie. No, I'm just kidding.
it is. Yeah. It's a hardcore genre piece for
Yeah.
sure. It's not my title, but it's semi-descriptive of the movie, I suppose. But I think it's going to be good. I haven't seen it yet. Um, and then I have a book, a textbook that I wrote. That I'm going to be doing a new edition for that, so that'll be coming out soon too. It's about producing for television and emerging media that is published by Routledge and Focal Press. And yeah, oh, and I'm collaborating with Fred Decker, who is a good friend of mine and known to 80s movie lovers as the writer and director of The Monster Squad and Night of the Creeps and The Predator. He and I are doing a genre thriller together set on an airplane that is going to be really super fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Any social, excuse me, any social media you want to shout out? I'll link to the website in the
I have Facebook, but I don't really use it for much. So yeah, our the Long Rewind, our podcast, has a Letterboxd page because I mention all these movies on every episode, and so people are like, we need those lists of all those movies, and so that's where I post the lists of movies that we're discussing in each
Mhm.
episode. So if you're listening to that show and you think that's something I want to listen to, but you can't find the name of it later, that's where you can go to find it. But beyond that, it's just my website, which is just dustinmorrow.com.
And again, it's exhaustive with what all is there and what you've linked to. It even links to some of the film work as well. You know, people can
Mm-hmm.
find the films in various places, and that's all linked there. Is before I'm going to say goodbye to you after we finish recording, but is there anything else you want to cover that we didn't talk about?
I don't think so. I think thank you for listening. If you're interested in my work, you can find it at that website. And my other movies are all streaming on Amazon and Canopy and Hoopla, and I think one of them's on Hulu. And so I'm out there.
Tubi,
You can
Tubi.
find me out there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dustin, thank you so much for talking to me. I could talk to you for hours. I could talk to you all day. This has been a real pleasure for me. Thank
cool.
you.
Well, and we look forward to having you on our show as well. It's gonna be fun.